Hello, my name is Tessa Asquith-Lamb and I'm an artist. I work at the City Arts Centre and other venues, leading workshops and also leading described tours for the visually impaired. In today's video we're going to be looking at some works from the exhibition Jock McFadyen Goes to the Pictures. In this exhibition, the artist, Jock McFadyen, was invited to select works from the collection of the City Arts Centre, Edinburgh. These are paired alongside works from his own career. This is part of the celebrations for the artist's 70th birthday. The first two paintings that we're going to look at together are Carlton Hill 3, an oil and canvas work by Jock McFadyen that dates from 2014, and Airy, a work made of willow, made by the artist Lizzy from 2011. We'll start by looking at the painting by Jock McFadyen. This is a really quite large, over 2 metres high, oil painting, and it's dominated by an image of the moon, this beautiful floating kind of silvery white globe of the moon towards the top right of the painting, and down at the bottom of the picture is a narrow strip of buildings. So you've got a kind of horizon line, which are the buildings and the monuments of Carlton Hill, which is right in the middle of Edinburgh. These include the Nelson Monument, and also there's an observatory there, which is very fitting in that this whole painting is dominated by the moon. And the artist talks about visiting Carlton Hill very regularly and going up and being kind of, really drawn in by that moon and that sense of when you're looking up into the night sky, how it becomes the only thing that you're aware of, and everything sort of grows in significance and scale, and that feeling that you have the moon kind of taking over your vision, and that sense of the immensity of the moon. That's what I get from this picture, that kind of awe-inspiring feeling that you get of looking up into the night sky. It's paired alongside an image called Airy by Lizzy, and this is different in that this is a sculptural wall piece, and it was made after the artist had visited Japan, and her work had started to become slightly more abstract, and she was making these wall-based pieces. And it's made of willow, which is a very traditional material, and the artist is really influenced by the way the material can be handled and the colours within the material. And she talks about different colours of willow being possible. So she talks about reds and golds and greens, almost 3 colours within the willow. And you maybe wouldn't see that until you got closer to it. But just from a distance in this image, I can see that there's a disc in the middle of this image which seems darker than the outer disc. Just to explain how this piece has been made, little short sticks of willow are pinned together with tiny nails to form 5 different sections, which are then slotted together and fixed together on the wall, and to make this what feels almost like a drawing on the wall, but it's made out of 3-dimensional objects. It's made out of these sticks of willow. So it's a really unusual kind of piece, and it's really big in scale. You've got this very sort of, overpowering, beautiful shape, and yet it feels very light, and it feels very sort of soft against the wall. These shapes against the wall almost feel like a drawing. The title Airy represents the name of an eagle's nest, but it can also represent an area that cannot easily be reached, a house or a stronghold in a high place. So there's that suggestion of somewhere that's, safe from the outside world, that has this defensive wall around it. And I think about ancient castles on hills and that kind of feeling, just as an eagle's nest on a hill would be very inaccessible. And also the twigginess of that, fits in with the willow, the idea of a nest on a high place. So these two images together obviously are very different. We've got the wall piece, which is made of these willow sticks, and then the painting, but they're both really kind of overpowered by these big disc shapes, the moon, and then the discs of the willow that represent the nest. So you've got this really sort of awe-inspiring big circles and shapes, and you would have to kind of look up also to look at these pictures and this wall piece. So there's that sense that you would approach these two pieces in a similar way, and you'd be looking up at them in the same way you look up at the night sky, or you'd look up to where an eagle was nesting. So I think there's that nice similarity there as well. At this point, I thought it'd be nice to bring in another painting by Jock McFadyen. This time it's a picture called Self-Portrait with Jake. Now Jake was the artist's greyhound. This is a painting from 2014 and it shows the artist looking straight out at us with his dog looking at the artist. Self-portraits are really fascinating, especially to other artists. And of course there's the idea that everything is a self-portrait. But in this instance, it really is a very sort of direct self-portrait of the artist looking straight out at us and his dog looking at him. So you've got a transferal of gaze in this picture. The dog looking at the man and the man looking out to us and us looking back at him. So we've got this kind of circular movement of gaze through the picture. What I really like about this picture is the shape of the greyhound's head. So they have these lovely long kind of elegant faces, and what I really like about this is how the dog's face is held in silhouette against this dark background, and the negative space, especially sort of under the dog's nose, is really beautiful in this picture. Now dogs in paintings have long been used as emblems of faithfulness, kind of the loyalty of the dog, so there's a really kind of long history of that in this picture. I also like how the dog is quite high up next to the man, sort of on an equal footing with his owner, because obviously dogs are usually much lower down towards the ground, but in this picture the dog is kind of sitting up on a par, you know, on a level with its owner. The nice link between this and the image of Carlton Hill that we were looking at earlier is that the artist often took Jake for walks up Carlton Hill and enjoyed time with him up there in that space. So when we look at that image of Carlton Hill with the moon above it, we can imagine the artist with his dog up there as well. And there's that sense of, you know, the dog and the man under the moonlight. It's a really sort of very appealing kind of image to have in your head. The next pair of images we're going to look at are Nightlight, a painting by Jock McFadyen from 1989, and Sir James Stewart of Coltness, Lord Provost of Edinburgh, an oil painting from probably the late 1650s, and this was painted by an artist called David Scougal. This is the oldest painting in the exhibition. These are both portraits of figures looking straight out at us from quite dark backgrounds, and we'll look at them one by one. So the Nightlight image shows a transvestite taxi driver looking out over what looks like a kind of doorway. They're wearing a sleeveless dress with a collar with a floral pattern and hold a cigarette in their hand. They're looking straight out at us, and behind them is what looks like a reddish light in the top right hand corner, which looks like a kind of glow up in that top right hand corner. More about that later and how it refers to the other picture. The texture of the paint in this picture is quite interesting. It has a really sort of chalk-like quality. It reminds me of the colours that you get in a box of chalks when you're little, especially the kind of pinky colour of the skin. And the figure is looking really directly out at us and is silhouetted against this dark background. And as soon as you put that dark background on a portrait, it's really going to make you focus back on the figure and back on the eyes especially that are looking out at you. Whenever eyes look out at you from a painting, it's really arresting rather than sort of looking to one side. If they're looking straight at you, it really sort of draws you into a piece. And this is contrasted in the exhibition with this picture of a person in high authority. So a Lord Provost is kind of the equivalent of a mayor in some other sort of cities, and the Lord Provost themselves is somebody, you know, of power and respectability, and here they are having themselves recorded in this way by a very prolific portrait painter of the time who is, you know, painting lots of pictures of the nobility. To analyse this picture, we look at the figure, and because he's wearing very sort of dark clothing, we're really drawn to the hands and the face. So the face is framed by this kind of white collar underneath, and he's got these really soft kind of lustrous waves of hair coming down and looking straight out at us with a slight sort of frown on his face, very serious man. And his hands on the table and also holding his other glove. So he's got one bared hand, his right hand's bare, and then his left hand holds the other glove. So we can see his hand resting on this rich kind of silky tablecloth in the bottom left hand corner of the image. A convention in lots of portraits through time has been this kind of swag of drapery, this kind of rich curtain that you can see at the top right of this picture. And this has got a gold tassel and a gold fringe, and there's a real skill in painting fabric like this. And some painters would have kind of a sort of studio assistant who was really, really good at painting fabrics, and they'd have somebody else that was really good at, you know, doing the details of masonry in the background. And they would have lots of people that worked on the backgrounds of the pictures, while the main artist kind of worked on the figure and the face. In this picture, we've also got a hint of a landscape behind the figure. So there's a sort of window behind the curtain which is looking out onto a landscape which looks like parkland with a house or castle within it. And this does two things. It suggests that the person in the picture is a person of some wealth, you know, that they have access to this kind of parkland or a house. But also it gives you a way out of the picture. You're not just confined with this figure in a little tiny room. There's a way out in this picture, suggesting distance and suggesting light and the outside world. Now, in his lifetime as Lord Provost, he did many things, and he was described as being, in a period of office, included the decision to fortify the harbour of Leith, and also he was part of creating a new road between Edinburgh and Leith, which later became Leith Walk. So if you live in Edinburgh, you'll know Leith Walk. So I thought that was interesting that he was part of that decision to create that very important thoroughfare. When we look at these two pictures together, there's interesting comparisons to be made. Obviously, these are people from wildly different time periods and wildly different stations and positions of power. Obviously, the Lord Provost is somebody with immense power and status, and that's really kind of shown in this picture. These very dark, sombre clothes are very expensive clothes as well, and keeping this kind of beautiful white collar clean would be an expensive thing, and being so beautifully groomed and just commissioning a portrait of any kind was obviously an expensive thing. And you contrast that with the status of the taxi driver. You know, this is just sort of an ordinary person about their everyday life. You've also got the comparison between them, where you've got this sense of the red patch of red colour that's in that top right hand corner. So in the James Stewart of Colt Ness image, you've got that red curtain at the top right hand corner. But then also nicely in the Nightlight image, you've got that red sort of sphere, that kind of red orb of light up in the top right hand corner. And both images are very strong facial expressions. Both those images are really sort of looking out at you with real intensity in these pictures. I think that's the kind of the feeling I get off both of them. I think there's something interesting about the hands as well in them. The hand on the table in the David Scougal image is just such a strong kind of rest. It feels like a forceful image. You know, he's kind of staking his claim on that portrait by having that hand resting forward. And then also you've got the hand in the Nightlight image with the cigarette, which is almost sort of leaning on the edge of a kind of parapet at the front of the picture. And this has been used by lots of artists through time, the idea that the figure's almost sort of coming forward into your space by resting their arm on the front of the painting, as if they're kind of just breaking that wall between you and them, just sort of letting themselves into your space. So in our next video, we're going to be looking at elements from these pictures and developing some sketchbook techniques based on some of the details from these two images here and the ones that we were looking at earlier, and just experimenting with sketchbooks and how artists can use sketchbooks to develop their work. So I hope you'll join me for that next video.